So maybe this is about thinking, well, how can we design homes that are more sustainable, maybe using different materials, maybe easier to construct, maybe quicker and faster to construct as well. And maybe using materials that are recycled. You know, we talked about the recycling and waste principle earlier, but the materials principle is very closely linked to that, because if we're going to recycle all these materials, what are we going to make them into? And of course we have many opportunities to make new products and new materials from waste. And this is an example of a piece of roofing that's made from Tetra Pak cartons. And those people who are going to Chapelmanguera tomorrow will see that in the Favela Inn, where they're going to have lunch. So that's some of the opportunities around sustainable materials.
When we talk about food, I think it's interesting to think that every time we're building a new area in a city, every time we're building something, we're basically taking away capacity of the earth to produce the things that we use. It's not a bad thing that we're building. We know now that we are an urban world. More than 50% of the population live in towns and cities. That's a reality. It's an urbanized world, but that means we have less area to produce things, including food. So what can we do? And one of the things that local and sustainable food looks at is how can we bring back that production into the urban areas. So we have built areas which do have the capacity to grow food. So we should think about local food, but we should think about seasonal food. I don't know if it happens here, but I know in other countries people are getting used to having all sorts of fruits all year long. Maybe you're a bit more tropical, so maybe you have mangoes all year long. In Mexico we don't. Either you eat mangoes in April or you wait until next year. And some people are starting to get used to buying a mango in December. What's happening? That mango is being imported from maybe Brazil, maybe Australia, I don't know where. But the mango is coming over, probably frozen, in a big ship. And it's again frozen in the shop so that people can eat a mango out of season. Those are the kind of things that we need to think about when we talk about sustainable food. And I think it's going back a bit to the old days, going back to tradition, and it's not a bad thing. Well, if it's mango season, we eat mangoes. If it's not mango season, we eat something else. I don't know what else is in season in December, but I'm sure we will find something. The other thing is growing food in our cities. And we have all these, for example, all this roof space in many buildings. We have all these pavements, and we plant very nice plants to make them look beautiful. Why don't we start planting something that produces food? Why not walking into a park and grab a fruit and eat it instead of having a tree that is just soaking water from the land and apparently looking nice, but maybe is also competing with the local species? So that's what we mean when we talk about local and sustainable food. Local, seasonal, fresh, healthy food. So let's just grab an orange from our tree next door.
That is, can you just go back to that, that slide? So that actually was taken in Tabajaras. And we've been walking around Tabajaras and Chapelmanguera. There are many different fruit-producing trees and plants. We have the oranges. We've seen bananas. I'm looking at Leo. Pitanga. Acerola, mamão, jaca, jackfruit. You see, it's endless. There are so many different trees and fruits and plants.
And actually, I forgot to say that in many places, I mean, this is of course about, we see it now as about sustainability and about reducing environmental impact. But in many places where food is grown properly in cities, it's about saving money. It's about eating a healthier produce. I mean, eating a tomato from your own tree than buying it from, what's the name? Pau de Açúcar, the supermarket. God knows how long it has been there. It's healthier, and there is a lot of money to be saved by growing our own food in our own back garden.
Okay, so the sixth principle is about water, sustainable water. Now, you know, we know that in Rio there's plenty of water, there's plenty of rain, and there's generally not a shortage of water in Rio. But in many communities there is a shortage of water, and in many countries, I know in talking to Daniel, in Mexico it's very dry in some parts. It's an issue. But of course, in Rio, there's plenty of water, but there's plenty of wastage of water as well. And the average consumption of water in Rio is 215 liters per day per person. But the average consumption of water in Babylonia, Chapelmanguera, for example, is 600 liters of water per person per day. And you see in many communities there are open pipes just wasting water like that. So it's also an issue where you have standing water creating disease. Dengue is also a problem because of exposure to open water or open drainage. And also we know that people build houses in areas that they shouldn't do, and sometimes we have landslides and erosion by water. You know, so water is an issue in a number of different ways, and the way we look at this as a principle is how can we reduce consumption? So maybe this is about educating people to use less water, but also having appliances that use less water. But also, how can we make drainage in our urban areas more sustainable? So, for example, why do we have to have concrete everywhere when we could have paving that is permeable, that allows the water to drain through the paving? And then we don't need to have problems with flooding. Maybe if we have green roofs on our houses, so it absorbs the water and releases it more slowly, so we don't get these flash floods of water and flooding. I know flooding is a big problem in Rio. So that's also important to think about. How can we manage drainage more sustainably in our urban areas? So that's how we approach water. We're nearly there. We've only got 3 more to go.
Land use and wildlife, and you will start seeing the synergies and the relationships that there are between the different principles. The idea of this whole one planet concept is that it's friendly, it's easy, it's almost common sense when you think about it. And I know many of you are probably doing many of these things at home already. And I suppose what One Planet offers is the opportunity to put it together and to create a nice story, so that when we talk about what does it mean to bring good living into my community, we can start thinking about different things, and we can make sure we're not forgetting others that are important. So what do we mean by land use? And we were talking about how every time we build something, we're basically taking away capacity from the earth to produce the things we use, or to absorb the things the waste we generate. So using the land wisely means how can we maximize the biocapacity of the earth whilst providing the spaces we need, and how can we use those spaces appropriately. And it's not just about growing food, and it's not just about giving space for the wildlife. It's about using space for our community, and having open space where we want open space, and having community space where we want community space, and having shared spaces, and using the space wisely, especially in places like, I suppose, Rio, where space is limited. And you can only grow to a certain extent because you have the mountains there that don't allow further growth.
Okay, and so the 8th principle is called culture and community. And this is very important because without strong relationships between ourselves and our neighbors and the wider community, we're not going to be able to achieve the kinds of changes that we need to, and also we're not going to be happy. So this is very much about building on local cultural identity and trying to create a sense of identity and belonging where we live. This is very, very important. It's also about trying to create a culture around sustainable living. So all the things we're talking about today, how can we try to get more people in our community to understand and to behave differently around these issues, and to see the opportunities that they have in their communities to have a better life and a more sustainable life. So this is around looking at the kinds of community organizations that we have, looking at, as Daniel said, looking at public spaces, making sure we have enough space for people to come together and to be a community, which is always sometimes challenging to find the space, especially in Rio. But it's also about involving people, and it's about consulting people. And I think this is quite a big challenge in Rio, and I know that it's very important to be reaching out and involving people, because if people are not owning these changes, then they're not going to last. They're not going to be strong. So this is a very important principle. Oh, and this some of you may recognize. This is a band called Puro Acaso, and there was a walk in Tabajaras 2 weeks ago, and it just made me think, this is what culture and community is about. It was such a brilliant evening, and for me as a gringo, to be there with all this in this community, with this fantastic music and all this fantastic food. It was a gastronomic walk through the favela in Tabajaras. Foi muito bom. But this is what we mean. This is what we're talking about, and this is very strong in Brazil, and go for it.
Equity and local economy, and I can't think of an example here, but I'll tell you an example that happens all the time in Mexico. Where I live, there are a lot of people who grow asparagus, so we grow that. But if you go to the supermarket and you pick up a pack of asparagus, it says produce of Peru. So I've asked these people who grow asparagus what's happening, and they say, oh, we export everything. 100% of our production goes to the USA and Canada. So in my city, which is called Querétaro, we import asparagus from Peru and we export asparagus to the USA. And I just find that unbelievable, and I cannot imagine that it's cheaper. But apparently, either it is cheaper or it's just something that people don't think about it anymore, and they just think, oh, let's export because the Americans pay a lot for our asparagus, and then someone else is bringing them from Peru for us to buy them. And I think it's ridiculous. So when we talk about local economy, that's what we mean. Because it's not just about creating a local economy, it's about reducing the environmental impact of our food. Because as you can imagine, those asparagus come with a very heavy load of carbon because they've been either sailing or flying from Peru to Mexico for us to eat them, and then the same hours to the US. And I'm sure that happens with many, many, many things we're eating. So when we talk about the local economy, that's what we talk about. But there's also the business of fair trade, and I think you're probably more familiar with that because of the coffee business. Coffee is one of the first products that started looking at this sort of international initiative called Fair Trade, which basically is making sure the big coffee producers are paying a fair value for the coffee crops or the chocolate, cocoa crops or bananas or tea. But it's not just about having the stamp and the certification of fair trade. It's about fair trade with our neighbors. It's about fair trade with our local suppliers. It's about fair trade in general. It's about creating a local economy that promotes jobs in our community, that provides a better quality products. For example, if we think about growing food in our garden, in our back garden or in our rooftop, and every Saturday we created a local market. So we're creating a local economy with healthier, fresher, delicious food that we've grown ourselves, and we're creating local jobs, and we're creating a community event, and we're using public space. So all these things start making sense when we think about them all together. And I think that's what we would like you to think about later on today when we talk about a more practical exercise, and certainly tomorrow when we walk the communities. Many of these things maybe are already happening, but identifying them and putting them together and creating a nice story about what does it mean to bring good living into the city, and an option is what does it mean to bring one planet living into my community, into your community.
Okay, oh yeah, this is Favela Inn. So some of you will see this tomorrow in Chapel Mangueira. So this is a good example of, of developing the local economy, in the favela. So. And
by the way, you'll see it has fantastic views, much better than many of the hotels in the beachfront in Copacabana.
Yeah, but not yours, Daniel. You have a lovely lovely hotel.
No, mine's looking at the back.
Oh, is it? Okay. Okay, great. So the last principle is health and happiness, and this is our favorite principle because this is really what it's all about. What are we trying to do if we're not trying to create health and happiness? This is really the main objective of human progress, is about being happier and healthier. This is what we're trying to achieve. So this really kind of ties together all of the other principles, and but it's also about ensuring that we have physical health, and we know that there are problems in communities where housing conditions are bad and people have problems with their breathing because housing is very damp, for example. But it's also about mental health, and it's also about spiritual health. I know Brazil is a very spiritual country, and everybody knows that God is Brazilian. So I've been told.
And part Mexican.
And part Mexican, okay. So this is about, are we building communities that have, enough access to medical care, to medical services, but are we, caring for each other and looking after our mental health and our spiritual health as well? So, but it's also about, making the community more beautiful. I think we want to be proud of the communities that we live in. When you get up in the morning and you look out and you see a nice community with lots of green space and trees and flowers, then you're going to feel happier. And of course, many communities don't look like that now, and we need to change that. That's important. So I think I think we're going to break for coffee in a minute, because I know this has been a bit of a long session. But I hope it's been useful. But what I want to really finish with saying before we have coffee is that the one planet concept is sustainability. This is what we mean by sustainability. And this is what they're all talking about, or should be talking about, in Rio Centro. These are all the issues that need to come together. And I think we have a tendency sometimes to think about one problem or another problem, but we need to be thinking about all of these issues together because they all connect with each other. And, you know, whether we're talking about waste, for example, you know, waste is also connected to food because, you know, we create food waste, but also we have food waste that we can use to compost to grow more food. Recycling is connected to materials. Energy is connected to transport. Health is connected to food. Water is connected to food. All of these principles connect with each other. And unless we think about sustainability in a holistic way and try to find solutions by thinking of all of these 10 principles, then we're not really going to achieve sustainability at all. So that's really the kind of final message of this session this morning before we break for coffee and we're going to do some practical work. We think it's a very easy way to talk about sustainability because when you say to someone, oh, I work in sustainability, or what do you think about sustainability? Most people go, I don't know. I don't know what sustainability is. It doesn't mean anything to me. So this is something that's very easy to talk about. It's very easy to communicate to other people. And it's a very practical way of thinking about this issue. And we've used it at Bioregional in many different ways. We've used it with communities. We've used it with some of the biggest companies in the world. We've used it with municipalities and local government. So this is a framework and an idea that is really catching on, and it's very popular and it's very useful, and anybody can use it. It's even being used by the London Olympics. When the Olympics, when London put their bid together for the Olympics, they used the One Planet framework, and we won the bid. And as you know, the Olympics is happening next month, not just because of us, but we like to think we played a part in that. And I think finally, it's about opportunity. And I'll come back to this idea. It's about creating solutions. And we wanted something that was very practical. So what we're going to do after the coffee break is break into groups.